What's shaking, cocktail fans? I'm Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. It's my job to hit the road and track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that I can share their secrets with you. This time around, I sit down with Melanie Asher, founder of Machu Pisco, to learn about this delicious Peruvian brandy. We talk about what it is and how it's made, and then we get to sample a bunch of really cool expressions from the Machu Pisco portfolio. If you've ever enjoyed a Pisco Sour or wondered how so much flavor can be packed into a single bottle, then I think you'll really enjoy this interview. Check it out. Melanie, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for coming over.
Yeah. First in-person podcast we've done in a while. So it's great to be back in person, and especially with all these beautiful bottles here in front of us. But before we get into tasting your lovely products, can you just introduce yourself for our listeners and tell us how you came into the world of Pisco?
Well, I really do think that Pisco runs in my blood. Like, it was divine intervention. I was a Pisco baby brought by the storks. And this has been a passion of mine. I've always had that entrepreneurial drive. And, wanted to bring goodness to the world through Machu Pisco, which is the national spirit of Peru. Mm-hmm. And having grown up there, I figured, why is there no Pisco in America? Or why is there no Pisco in the world? And it just seemed to me that this would be a way to bring work to Peru and, really expand the palette of Americans and Europeans to something completely different that they'd never tried before.
Yeah, Pisco is actually a super important spirit for American cocktails, going all the way back to the 1800s, of course, with the West Coast and the Pisco Punch in San Francisco. So you grew up in Peru. Like, roughly how old were you when you were living in Peru, and then how did you come to the United States?
So I was born in Peru and lived there until I was 7. And I have to tell you, Eric, that this entrepreneurial bug got me at the age of 6. I would go around the neighborhood collecting Coca-Cola bottle caps, filling them up with dirt and putting a little flour inside, and convincing the neighbors to buy it, I think more out of pity than anything. But I've just, really had that in me since early on. I moved to America at the age of 7, and then at the age of 9, I was a grape for Halloween. So at the age of 9, I knew I wanted to get into the Pisco business. So might be fun to bring that photo here for you to look. But I put some Pisco in my ice cream. And I told my parents, this is what I want to do with my life.
So Melanie, before we get into tasting some of these wonderful Piscos that you have here for us, I think we should do a little bit of groundwork, because I think most Americans would be able to say that they've heard of Pisco or tried a Pisco Sour, for example, but I'm not quite sure that they would be able to tell you exactly what it is. And so I was hoping you could just walk us through where Pisco sits in the landscape of world spirits compared to things like vodkas or gins or cane spirits, for example.
Well, Eric, Pisco is the oldest brandy of the Americas. And it's got a 400-year legacy before all the cognacs came over. And if you see in a lot of cocktail books, the old classics have a lot of brandy in them. And Pisco from Peru was used in the 1800s in America. So it used to be better known before Prohibition. And then unfortunately, it got lost in the era and in the trade. But it is a fantastic, delicious spirit made from grapes. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many spirits do you have out there that have about 10 pounds of grapes per bottle? Yeah.
That's crazy. And the bottle doesn't weigh 10 pounds.
No. And that's because we're basically distilling wine. And Machu Pisco has 10 pounds of grapes per bottle. La Diablada has 12 pounds of grapes per bottle. And we'll get into that later. But in terms of its provenance, it comes from the valleys of Peru situated in the desert areas south of the equator. So tons of sunlight. So we're looking at grapes that get, 365 days out of the year of sunlight, have a super high sugar content, and which would make it horrible for wine if you think about it. But for distilling a brandy, it is just sublime. And it's one of a kind, and it needs to come from Peru because where it is situated geographically.
Right.
And these grapes are, have a 400-year tradition. Before there were any sort of pesticides or farming aids or chemicals. And that's something that, I'm very attuned to, because I say if the Spaniards who brought the grapes from the Canary Islands to Peru were able to farm all naturally back then and produce such a marvelous spirit, why can't we do it now? So I tend to very much follow that traditional line of all natural grapes. And the way that I would compare it to other spirits, how I like to say it is, you go from grapes to wine to pisco to cognac. Okay, in terms of the process, raw material grapes fermented into wine, distilled into pisco, aged into cognac. Similarly, for the grain spirits, you would have grains, the raw material, fermented into beer, distilled into vodka, and then aged into whiskey. Obviously, there are nuances there, but I feel like that's a easy way to present it. But in terms of raw material, I say we are the king of purity, because we have a very strict denomination of origin, which is controlled and limited to the Pacific side of Peru by the ocean. And we are not allowed to add any yeast. We're not allowed to water. All piscos are distilled to proof. So if you can imagine that, right? I mean, there's no other spirit in the world that's distilled to proof.
That's a very non-interventionist denomination of origin, if you think about it, because most denominations of origin stipulate sort of, or many, I should say, stipulate a proof bandwidth or something like that, or they allow people to do whatever they need to the land to cultivate it. But it seems like you're hitting a bunch of process, geography, and sort of terroir aspects with the denomination of origin, which, it's interesting to see something that does such a good job of protecting purity in that respect.
And if you see, all of the spirits here are clear. Even our luxury presentation, Nusta, there is no aging. So no aging is allowed as well. So, and it's meant so you can taste the grapes that come from this marvelous, beautiful, pure region of Peru.
And we are back. We just set up a incredible 6-spirit flight here. All clear spirits, all Piscos, all from the Machu Pisco portfolio. Melanie, I'm just going to let you take it away here.
Okay. Well, we're up for a ride here, Eric. So this is my brainchild, the Machu Pisco brand. And the reason I came up with that name was because the first grapes that were brought to Peru came from the Canary Islands. And this red grape variety was first planted in Cusco, near where all the gold was, and obviously near where Machu Picchu was. So it didn't take hold. It was too cold and the terrain was not adequate. So the Jesuit priests took it down to the desert valleys. But in honor of the first grapes where they were planted is the name Machu Pisco.
I love it.
And it's made from the red grape of either Negra Criolla and the Quebranta grape. So these are two grapes that we have in Peru. Both came from the Canary Islands. The Negra Criolla grape, what we call in Peru, the Negra Criolla grape, is what you would call the Listan. I don't know if you've heard of that grape.
I've heard of it. I don't think I've ever drunk a wine that features it in any major way.
Okay, so mostly you're going to find Listans coming from the Canary Islands, and it has just a lot of full body to it, a lot of grittiness to it, olive tasting to it, and that was the first grape that came to Peru, and as an offshoot, a hybrid of that is the Quebranta grape. The Quebranta is the hybrid naturally occurring of the Negra Criolla and the Mollar grape. And that is the grape that you will mostly see in Peru. So Machu Pisco is predominantly Quebranta. Will on some occasions have some Negra Criolla, but these grapes are characterized as what would be called non-aromatic. There's no such thing as a non-aromatic grape, but in terms of tasting, we are going to start with the Machu Pisco, which has that herbaceous quality to it.
It's certainly very green on the nose.
Very much so. Very much so. And what I like to say is that, you're going to first get the hints of this greenness, which sometimes doesn't parallel to when you're thinking grapiness, right? But grapes, like wines, they have that scent of the terroir. And I do feel like this gives you a lot of the greenness of Machu Picchu.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, I think the label color is perfect because that's the color green it smells like. And it also reminds me of pear, which is one of the flavor notes that I'm pulling out just from the nose. Not like a super ripe Bartlett pear, but one of those nice green. Yeah, it's got a hint of sweetness on the nose, and you're right, because I do love grape distillates, and I love grape vodkas compared to things like corn vodka, because I think that corn vodka tastes rancid most of the time. But grape vodkas, you really get that grapiness, that soft sweetness, and it has a very different grapiness to it. You're right. It's not super sweet. It is very green and very lively. Let's taste it.
Yeah.
Oh,
very round. So my methodology for distinguishing Machu Pisco and La Diablada and Yusta from other Pisco categories, and that's why we started the premium category, is that I do a gravity press. Okay. 100% all our grapes are pressed that way. So therefore, what I find is you get that clean and crispiness, no funkiness. I am completely abhorrent of any funkiness in my spirits, and here you can get that roundness. So is this your first drink of the day, Eric?
Of the day, yes.
Okay,
certainly.
Good. So I would just say with this first one that we just go back to it, just as your palate gets used to it. For our friends that are listening, one recommendation that I have for professional tasting is to not wear any cologne, not wear any deodorant, preferably not eat, which can be a little bit dangerous, but we do have our spitting cup right here.
That's true. Yeah.
And our water. But that subtleness of this is beautiful for making cocktails. You mentioned the Pisco Sour earlier, you mentioned the Pisco Punch.
Sure.
And this just has a lot of full-bodied to it. And I don't know if we go back to it again, if you might be able to perceive a little bit in the mouth.
One of the things that I really like about it is that it does have an incredibly long finish for something that is an unaged distillate. I think a lot of the times what we look for in an aged spirit is that long evolving finish that comes from polyphenols, and it comes from the tannins and lignins and vanillins in the oak. But rarely do you come across, and I think if you do come across it, most likely it's a type of brandy or a fruit or a grape brandy where you get that really nice long finish in an unaged expression, which is really nice.
Yeah. And you know what makes a big difference? And this is where I was talking to you earlier about going beyond the denomination of origin and, doing good in the world, is we only support farmers that are not spraying their grapes. I don't know what's in those chemicals. I'm not a chemist. All I have to say is it was done for 400 years. Why should I go ahead and mess with nature now? Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that I'm distilling a product that has not been touched by sprays, there is chemistry in nature that we just haven't comprehended yet. And a different, the azotropes of like the chemicals compounding together just makes it easier for a clean cut for the heads and the tails. And that you're going to taste throughout all of our Piscos here today, is that clean and crispiness that comes through.